Stanford University.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Tim Schnabel. I am the president of the Stanford chapter of the Engineering Honor Society, Tau Beta Pi, and we are incredibly proud to be able to host today's event for you. Tau Beta Pi is the nation's second oldest collegiate honor society. We're founded in 1885 and have over 500,000 members across the country today. We're also the only engineering honor society that encompasses all majors and disciplines in engineering. Our mission is to spread excellence through exemplary character and integrity in our profession. We host events that focus on service, such as peer advising at Stanford and K-12 tutoring in East Palo Alto, professional development, such as CEO dinners and recruiting and networking sessions, as well as various social and community-based events throughout the year. Today marks the biggest event we have ever hosted. Today, this is an event with which we hope to give back to the larger community, the future of technology and entrepreneurship. This talk is the start of an annual series called the Tau Beta Pi Distinguished Speaker Series. It is my pleasure to hand the stage over to Stephanie Jan and Arthur Brandt, who are two officers who have worked tirelessly to bring this event together. And Stephanie will now introduce the three amazing speakers we have for you today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our first speaker series of the entire year. I'm honored to be here on behalf of Tau Beta Pi to introduce our three guest speakers for today, Michael Moritz, Patrick Collison, and Apoorva Mehta. Michael Moritz is the chairman of Sequoia Capital. He joined Sequoia in 1986 and has served on the boards of a variety of companies from inception to their emergence as global publicly traded companies. These include Flextronics, Google, PayPal, and Yahoo. He is currently a director of Instacart and Stripe. Patrick Collison is the founder and CEO of Stripe. Patrick is an Irish entrepreneur from County Limerick. He was the winner of the 41st Young Scientists in Technology exhibition in 2005 at the age of 16. He co-founded Stripe with his brother, John Collison. Stripe focuses on web and mobile payments built for developers. Apoorva Mehta is the co-founder and CEO of Instacart. Apoorva graduated from the University of Waterloo with an electrical engineering degree. Before starting Instacart, Apoorva worked as a supply chain manager at Amazon. Instacart allows customers to order their groceries from their favorite local stores and have them delivered in as little as an hour. We are so excited to have you with us today. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Michael Moritz, Patrick Collison, and Apoorva Mehta.
Well, let us interrupt your Snapchat sessions for 45 minutes or so.
It's Periscope now.
Periscope or Meerkat, I suppose. This actually is a job fair for Stripe and Instacart. How many of you are going to be looking for interesting places to work in the next year or so? Good. Patrick and Apoorva, I'm sure, will introduce you to the varied merits of their respective companies in the next little while. But Stephanie asked me to have a fairly wide-ranging conversation with both Patrick and Apoorva, touching on some of the things that perhaps as prospective entrepreneurs you yourselves would like to pose to them. And at the end, there'll be an opportunity for everyone to ask questions of the two of them. But you heard just a little fragment of their beginnings from Stephanie. Let me ask you first, Patrick, and then you, Apoorva, give everybody a picture of the background and circumstances in which you grew up, because both of you come from very different places, very different backgrounds, and you found yourself now within a couple of miles of each other working in San Francisco?
Well, I actually just came from this other event earlier today where there were a bunch of public companies, and one of the things that Stripe kind of contends with is it's I guess founded by two people who don't have a whole lot of gray hair yet, and so we're always trying to kind of puff our chests up and pretend we're a very big, solid, established company and so forth. And so in that sense, we try to downplay the biography and instead focus on all of the wizened and experienced people who now work at Stripe. But I guess there probably aren't too many public companies here, and so we can be a bit more direct in the biography. And so I grew up in Ireland. I lived there until I was 18 when I moved out to the US for school. Grew up sort of in rural Ireland. Like our internet connection had to come by satellite because literally just like the phone line didn't really work, or you could get like 1K a second if you were lucky. And so I lobbied my parents for years to sort of get this connection to Germany, and then eventually we did. And it was
how old were you when you started lobbying for that?
9 or 10, and then eventually we got it, and it was amazing. Although SSH sessions, like the latency was so bad, it was like 2 seconds per keystroke, which sucked, and Mosh didn't exist at the time. So anyway, grew up there. I'd always been really interested in programming and in particular in Lisp, which I guess nobody really uses anymore, but I thought it was fantastic. And MIT seemed to be the place where, sort of, to the extent that Lisp is alive anywhere, that MIT was kind of the last stalwart. And so decided I wanted to go to MIT. Well,
came to MIT. What about you, Apoorva?
So I grew up in Hamilton, Ontario, and we had much better internet there.
But you didn't really grow up in Hamilton, Ontario.
Yeah, so
you grew up somewhere else.
So
the eye knows.
So Hamilton, Ontario is where I was actually introduced to the internet. Before that, I was actually in Tripoli, Libya. There's a lot going on there now, but at that point in time, it was just a sort of a place where a lot of Canadian and European and South Asian immigrants would live and sort of work in the oil industry. And until I was 12, I lived there, and I didn't have a computer or access to any of the technology. And so when I moved to Hamilton, that's where, Hamilton, Ontario,
you needed satellite internet in Libya.
Well, you would need computers first, right? So when I moved to Hamilton, Ontario, I was just, thrilled to have access to all this technology. I started programming right away. I worked on autonomous cars. So I didn't really know what type of technology I liked, but I started picking up everything. So it was autonomous cars or building graphing calculators that could solve problems that I was having at school.
At high school or?
Yeah, high school.
Mm-hmm.
So that it was interesting. I think that a lot of times people ask me, well, was it, did you always know that you wanted to be an engineer? And the answer for me was I didn't have an option. That's the only thing I knew. And so it was very easy to go into engineering. And when you're in Canada, the school to go to is University of Waterloo. And so I chose that, and that's how I ended up.
Now, were any of your parents engineers?
No.
Mm-hmm. Both my parents actually trained as engineers, though by the time I was growing up, neither worked in that.
Mm-hmm. And Patrick, I rudely interrupted you earlier. You'd got as far as MIT. Then what happened?
I got to MIT and I realized that even at MIT, nobody was really doing much with Lisp, and so I became kind of disappointed. So I decided I would study math instead. Might as well abandon the field. I'd started college just for kind of unrelated reasons a year early. And so I kind of felt that I had a year to spare to do something with. And in Ireland, well, less so in Ireland, but especially in the UK, there's this really popular idea of sort of taking a gap year between high school and college, which I think is actually a really good idea because I think that it sort of gives you a chance to explore the wider world and just kind of get a better sense yourself for what you want and where you want to end up. I think that kind of one of the problems, especially for the people who are really smart in the US, is that you sort of so quickly get placed on sort of train tracks that don't provide much sort of affordance for steering yourself. And so anyway, I felt like I had this kind of year to spare. And so myself and John, my brother, decided to set up this little company. We'd sort of read about lots of startups. I think the fall that I started at MIT, Reddit was acquired. And in the scheme of things was a very small acquisition, but for us it was sort of a thing that we'd seen start out was suddenly bought by somebody else, and it sort of felt for the first time that perhaps sort of we could also build the kinds of things that somebody else might find valuable. And so we built this little company.
How long did you actually stay at MIT?
A total of 3 semesters. And so anyway, that little company didn't really go anywhere, but about a year after that, we started Stripe.
Yeah. And what about you? You went to the University of Waterloo, right?
Yeah. So, I picked a program. I picked electrical engineering just because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just wanted to keep everything very broad. And so, throughout my time at University of Waterloo, I worked at a steel factory. I was doing work with figuring out what the best way to move physical items there is. I worked on this was hardware and software. I was working on breast bumps at a company. I worked on the BlackBerry. I worked on at a company called Qualcomm doing quality of service for smartphone to computer data transmission. And then after that, I was still very clueless of what I wanted to do. So all these things were very interesting at different levels to me. And after sort of graduating from Waterloo, I decided that this was going to be a continuous trend until I truly figured out what I wanted to do. So I just had to keep trying different things. So I decided, well, why not go to Amazon? I found logistics very, very interesting. And so I started working there for a couple of years, which was a lot of fun initially, but then I realized that I had stopped learning. There was just nothing there to learn.
Let me come back to that in a moment. So, Patrick, you mentioned very fleetingly a little company that you and your brother John started when you're at MIT. Say a little bit more about that, how you came up with the idea, and then eventually, now that you can look back at it with some sort of objectivity and dispassion, the sort of lessons that you took away from that informed the way that you thought about what it was that you'd do next.
So what the company did was ostensibly it looked a little bit like a sort of local goods auction marketplace. And the sort of thinking behind it was that it's just really inefficient in the world that there is kind of no liquidity for used items, and there isn't largely because sort of the information problem hasn't been solved, right? If you want a new item, it's not that you sort of specifically want the item to be new necessarily, or at least in most cases. It's just that it's very easy to find a new item. You know where to go, you know where the store is. And maybe there's sort of 50 of them in a 1-mile radius, but you don't know where those are. And sort of the internet creates this potential to sort of facilitate that coordination, and again, to solve the information problem. And it just seemed like something that kind of fairly clearly should happen. And I guess eBay was really the only plausible contender in the space at the time. But obviously, I mean, well, I would not be surprised if literally nobody in this room had sold something on eBay, and so something just kind of seemed a little bit off. Like they empirically haven't solved that problem. And so that was the thinking behind the company. honestly, we didn't really go sort of much further than that in sort of thinking through go-to-market strategies or how we gain initial distribution and things like that. We really did just go from sort of that initial realization to starting to build. The iPhone, I believe the iPhone had just been announced when we started working on it, like maybe that month. And I remember the announcement of the iPhone being, at the time, a hugely exciting event. Like that just kind of doubled my enthusiasm about technology in general. At the time, Apple didn't stream their keynotes live, so you couldn't watch the video. And so I was just following along an IRC stream somewhere where people were like typing it out in real time. And even just reading the text was unbelievably exciting. And so I mean, again, there was sort of no ostensible or explicit plan rather for third-party apps, but we sort of had a sense that directionally there was probably something significant going to happen here. And so started building. We had maybe a first version that others could use in about 3 months or thereabouts. And it sort of went okay, I would say. It did gain some usage. It started to get some initial traction. We kind of had some ideas as to how we could sort of accelerate its adoption, in particular by sort of building tools for people already selling on eBay, and then we kind of shift the inventory across. And it's kind of a long story that's not really worth going into, but about 9 months later, we ended up selling the company to actually a company in Canada, and so it was sort of a nice end to that initial effort, and we sold it in part because, well, I guess as sort of impecunious students, it was a lot of money for us, even though in the scheme of things it was a very small acquisition. But also because I think we kind of had the sense that this wasn't going to be the one, right? And we kind of started it with the idea that this was something to do for a year in this gap year, rather than necessarily something that would become our life's work. And I think the single most useful learning out of it was, I guess artists sort of always talk about this idea of building one to throw away. And it was kind of useful to have seen the complete life cycle of a startup incorporation, building the first version of the product, getting beta users, and seeing the end of the company.
How many people did you have at the company? It was just
very few. I think at peak it was 6 or 7 people. Yeah. And so when we went to start Stripe, we were absolutely sure from sort of the first day that this one we did not want to sell. This one we're going to do properly. And I don't think we could have been kind of as sure about that had we not gone through the first one.
Now, back at Amazon, Apoorva, where did you wind up inside of Amazon? What were you doing there? And what did you learn while you were there about about a very successful company and some of the things that really work inside of a very successful company?
So, when I joined Amazon, I was, as new as I could be. I didn't know anything about the sort of the stack that they were using, the technology that they were using. I didn't know much about logistics either, and so I had a lot to learn. Amazon is a hugely successful company, largely because of its supply chain solutions. And so when I was there were, as you would expect, there's a lot of things that you learn about handling and working with tons of data, working on hugely scaled distributed architecture, working with solving some really complex machine learning and logistics algorithmic problems, which were all really, really fun. But I'd say the core, something that I truly learned and something that I walked away outside of Amazon was how much attention people everywhere in the organization put towards the customers. Regardless of if you were a QA engineer or if you were an engineer, manager, any position in the whole 50,000 or more person company, every single person there would ask the simple question: does this code impact the customer in a positive way or not?
That's hard. I believe you, but it's hard to believe. How did they inculcate that approach so deeply and embed it so deeply in the company?
Everything at Amazon was done with that in mind. So you would walk into the company, and then the furniture would just look weird because, they would give you, they would point to a sort of a door and saying that that's your desk. And then you would have this shock asking, well, why is that my desk? And then the answer would always be, well, look, the history behind this desk is that back in the day when Amazon was just getting started, they didn't have money to buy the furniture, and so they just decided to use doors instead. Now, in fact, it actually costs more to use the door desks rather than normal desks, but still, it was just the fact that I learned that even the most simplest things that Amazon does have been thought through with the eyes from the customer, because the money that Amazon was saving as a result of not investing in furniture was going passed back to the customer. And then, in day-to-day, everyone, when there would be a bug, for example, the question that you would be asking is, how many customers are being impacted? Every single conversation had customers being the main focus. When you would go into a meeting, there would be one chair that would be left empty. And the reason for that was because that was the chair of the customer. That was the voice of the customer. And so those were, there's a lot of things but I think that in terms of, working extremely hard on figuring out the details, the metrics, working with highly scalable systems. But if there was one key takeaway, it was the fact that every person in the organization was fully focused on the customers, and that was a big learning experience.
Go ahead, Patrick.
I was just saying, I guess you're sort of asking these questions about where we came from and college and so forth, and just kind of reflecting on it and looking back, and it's kind of interesting to hear sort of a slightly parallel experience from Apoorva. I think the most valuable thing for me that came out of the slightly atypical background, and that sort of particularly struck me as I got to college, was I think coming from a weird background sort of makes you more conscious that you don't actually have a whole lot to lose, and that you kind of have to be more deliberate about what you choose to do, and that you aren't actually, in fact, on two rails sort of leading you through life. And I remember it being really surprising when I got to college. I mean, it wasn't that sort of nobody wanted to do entrepreneurship in particular, because I don't think that entrepreneurship is necessarily the path that everyone should follow. Right. But it was more that nobody wanted to do anything all that unusual. Yeah. And it seemed like such a huge loss in some sense, in that, I mean, so many of these people were better than me, smarter than me, had far more potential, right? But they all seemed to, like, they'd been on this path from a very early age. They'd gone to really good, kindergartens, K through 12, private high school, whatever. They'd now got into the best colleges, and they were sort of pursuing, it seemed, this kind of downside minimization, optimization function or something, right? And then in terms of what they did afterwards, it was like, which, I remember, I think the week I got to campus at MIT, I read in the tech that 60% or something like that of the graduates from the prior year had gone into finance. And it was just this.
Now, let me tell you about those prospects.
But it was just like this amazing kind of juxtaposition where on the one hand, there was kind of this student intake where they all had these amazing ideas as to the things that they kind of could do in the world and so forth, right? And then something had happened sort of over the subsequent 4 years, such that by the end, they all just wanted to go work at Goldman.
Yep. Now, there's a waste of a life. Different topic. Before we all get into lots of trouble.
Didn't you just come from a Goldman conference?
Seriously, on that note, I think that for some set of people, going to Goldman is absolutely what they should do. For some set of people, it's entrepreneurship. For some set of people, it's becoming an artist. I don't know, but it's the kind of the credential pursuit. It just seems so off.
Where did you get each of you, or let's start with you, Apoorva. Where did you get the germ of the idea for Instacart? Where did that come from?
So that was a lot later, a lot after me leaving Amazon. After leaving Amazon, I worked on about 20 different startups, just building a product and failing, building a product again, failing, and it just continued for a very long time. So one thing
I never remember hearing about that bit, but
so as you go through this exercise that I did, I think similar to what Patrick was saying, which was just sort of just considering all your options. I started building a startup for advertising. I started working on sort of something that was very similar to Groupon. Or something similar to Yelp, and they were just all these ideas that had sort of great sort of at the time that I thought they were good business ideas, and it was just failure after failure. It was just not something I wanted to, not something I would get much success with. And then I started working on this interesting business idea called it was called Legal Reach. It was a network for lawyers, the idea behind this was, well, if you can connect lawyers, they could potentially work together in a more effective way. You can tag each other in articles. You can tag each other in court cases. So legal research becomes a lot easier. And the good thing about this was that, and this was why this was a good business idea, was that we had all of the legal sort of network already created on our platform. So the people just did not know about this. And so when someone would sign up, we would already know who they were connected to via the articles, via the cases they'd worked on. And so this was my business idea that I was working on with a co-founder. We raised money. We had a team for this. But I realized that every single day I would go back home after work and I would stop thinking about this idea. I just did not care about this idea. I'm not a lawyer. I don't care about lawyers. I don't. I don't know what they do on their day-to-day life, and so I couldn't care about this idea. So this was now it seems hilarious, but at the time it was just really painful. And so after that, I decided that I wouldn't sort of work on an idea that I truly did not fall in love with. And so it was actually 3 years ago on May 5th that I decided to work on Instacart full time. And the reason for that was because I couldn't stop thinking about the idea. It was just, I remember the day that I started thinking about this, and I was a different person. There was this sort of, before this I was sort of, a happy-go-lucky person. And then after this, I was just, I had this idea in my mind, and I would just be thinking about this. There was just this struggle that you're going through about how all the risks in the business. How do you grow? How do you figure out all the little details? And what's interesting is that to this day has not changed. I'm still thinking about this idea all the time.
And where did you get the germ of the idea, or was it John who had the germ of the idea?
So I think we've both gone through similar experiences that led to it. And I think there's probably more, but there seems to be two very common categories of sort of startup ideas. Sometimes you have a new technology that just seems like it would have obvious kind of real-world applications, like maybe you invent the integrated circuit, and it's sort of clear that should be kind of brought to market. And sometimes you stumble across an experience or an interaction with another company that is so obviously horrifically broken and inefficient and, honestly, offensive that you just feel like there has to be another way, right? And so I guess it was just announced that sort of Zenefits has raised a bunch of money. And I think that's an instance of that, right? Sort of dealing with all these brokers was so miserable and so inefficient, right? That there was just this sort of vast potential well of opportunity to go and do it better. And so at Stripe, it's actually kind of a difficult one to describe to people who haven't gone through it themselves, because it's kind of hard to believe that it could be so bad, right? But it's pretty straightforward. You want to go from having a credit card number from one of your customers a customer who isn't there in person. They're on your website or using your mobile app or whatever, and you want to go from that to having money in your bank account, right? Pretty straightforward. This should not be very complicated, and yet somehow, because of all these kind of weird Baroque, historical, and anachronistic reasons, it involved calling salespeople and faxing paperwork and trying to convince them to work with you, and then sending another scan of your passport and pulling credit checks and taking weeks of time, and then trying to integrate with, if they were newer, their SOAP APIs, or otherwise maybe like SFTPing some CSV, and just like the whole thing was insane. And so we had sort of gone through this kind of repeated experience of just like building different websites, apps, whatever, right? And in like one case, maybe two, we'd actually gone and sort of integrated payments. And in all the others, we actually hadn't even bothered because it was just too much hassle. We sort of figured, well, we'll maybe get around to it some other day, right? And so it was impossibly broken, and it seemed kind of even worse than, I mean, there's kind of an obvious problem where the people who actually are going and integrating payments are having a miserable time of it. But we thought there was probably an even bigger kind of additional problem where a lot of the people who could be integrating payments in some ways aren't. And so kind of there are transactions on the internet, potential transactions that aren't actually happening, right? And so that was kind of the initial germ of the idea. And then I guess the other thing I'd say on it is I think that it's, especially if you're thinking about entrepreneurship as a career or something like that, I think you sort of feel like you have to have a big idea, right? And this doesn't even just apply to entrepreneurship. I remember Richard Hamming making the point in one of his talks. He was a very successful scientist at Bell Labs, making the point that in some way Nobel Prize winners seem to do worse after winning a Nobel Prize because they only felt that they could work on big, important problems, right? And often kind of the little acorns that yield the tremendous results actually start looking very small. And so Stripe certainly, I mean, it looks pretty small. It was a credit card API for developers. It seemed like a neat thing to sort of work on the side while we were still in school, but it did not seem like it would be, not even necessarily a huge company, but even something we should work on full time, right? And it was really kind of in the process of spending time on the problem and getting deeper into it and realizing sort of what the adjacent problems were that also weren't solved and so forth, that we sort of came to realize that, plausibly there could be 10x more transactions happening on the internet as a whole if we sort of solved it correctly. But yeah, for the first couple of months, it was better credit cards for developers.
No, I remember. I suspect there are a lot of potential founders in the room here today. Both of you obviously are founders. Both of you know lots of founders. What are the most important characteristics that you would suggest to anybody thinking about starting a company that they themselves should be honest when they look in the mirror and ask themselves, do I have these sorts of characteristics required to be a founder? Do I have what it takes to be a founder? What are the characteristics that you'd enumerate?
I think this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. And since I guess my journey started when I started working on ideas, and one thing that's just consistent is that you fail every single day, and I thought that would change once I had an idea that I was just really excited about. I had a product, I had some funding, I had a team, I had all those things I thought would basically mean that it would just the struggle would get any lesser, and it would just get easier. The reality is that at every point in time, what you're doing is you're trying to be someone different. So now, for example, as Instacart has grown, I have to learn to be a CEO of a 200 to 500 person company, which is something I've never done before. In the early days, I had to figure out how to build a product and how to scale the technology that we were building. Again, so all those were new challenges that I'd faced. And so I think that one thing that I think entrepreneurs should have is it's quite obvious. It's persistence, because that really is something that will be needed all the time.
I'd echo every word of that. There's this quote from Greg LeMond, the cyclist, about how in cycling, it never gets easier, you just go faster. I think that kind of applies to starting a company in the sense that if you are lucky, / if you're good, / if your idea is good, maybe you'll sort of progress through the stages faster, but that only enables you to get to the next problem sooner. But it's not actually easier. And I mean, honestly, to the outside world, I think it probably looks like Stripe has had, a pretty sort of fortunate existence, right? We've sort of gone through these various rounds of funding, and there's 250 employees or whatever, right? And I can tell you, sort of having been through it, like we would not get out of here today if I sort of started enumerating the unbelievably shitty moments.
Such as what?
I remember multiple times in the early days walking home with John, my co-founder, and saying to him, maybe we should just give up on this. It can't work for this reason or that reason or whatever, right? You have sort of industry experts telling you that it can't work. You sort of discover something new. Somebody says no to you. A hire refuses to join. Somebody leaves. Just like there's an infinite list of terrible things that can happen, and a surprising number of them do. And so I guess I'll say even like I think we have been lucky with Stripe in many ways, but even sort of sitting here, it's shockingly difficult, and there are just like an astonishing number of setbacks.
What's it?
Yeah, I guess we're being very encouraging, but
you're alive. You're standing, more than standing, flourishing.
Well, actually, okay, the specific thing that I think falls out of that as a consequence of there being so many setbacks is get a co-founder. I don't know if sort of you need one or not. I suspect there are lots of people who...
Apoorva doesn't really have one.
I mean,
he has more emotional fortitude than I do.
Has that been tough, not having co-founder?
It's very tough. And I'm not sure, Patrick, how lonely it is for you, but I suspect it's less. You're going through all this struggle, and like I said, it doesn't end. And you have this question. Well, are we even going down the right track? You have to be confident. You have to make it very clear to the team that you're going in the right direction. But inside, you're questioning it every single day. So I think it is very hard, but I think there's a big sort of question that you have to ask, is that it is substantially better to be a solo founder than have a co-founder that you're not confident about. And so I think that it's a very important relationship, and so. If you're starting off, I think it's worth the time to find a co-founder. But if you cannot find someone that you can really continue this 10, 15, 20-year journey, then I would say that it's actually much better to be a solo founder. So early days, actually, Paul Graham forced me. He kept saying, "Look, you need to go get a co-founder." And I just couldn't find a co-founder.
Is there, looking back now, is there something that each of you wished you'd known at the time that you started Instacart or at the time that you started Stripe that you've subsequently learned? Or
maybe I can think of a...
If not, that's fine.
Well, I think the one that's kind of been most surprising, I think, is just how long it takes to recruit the best people. That everyone sort of, startup land is full of infinite blog posts and tweets and bromides and aphorisms and advice and all the rest, right? And among them is hire the best people, right? And it's pretty hard to disagree with. What they don't tell you, or at least never told me, is just how freaking long that takes. Because the best people are generally doing pretty good things. They have their own life plans. They're probably on an extremely promising trajectory and so forth, right? And so you can't just call them up and say, yo, I got this company. And so, there were a lot of people who I knew that I really wanted to work with, who I thought sort of extremely highly of. And so I guess I went and called them, and they're like, sorry, I'm doing this thing. So it's like, and so we've been lucky now where a bunch of them have joined Stripe, but in many cases, it took years. Like it's taken, I think the longest is on the order of 4 years. There were lots of people where it took more than a year. There were lots where it took more than 2 years. And just dealing with that is really hard, right? Because there's a bunch of stuff that you want to get done next week, next month, whatever, right? And so sort of 2 years' time seems so impossibly far away that it doesn't even seem clear that it's worth the effort. And yet now, kind of looking back, I think that we'd be a much different and much worse company had we not spent all that time on sort of trying to make it happen. So for me, that's probably been the biggest.
I agree, and I think that one thing I'd like to add to that is the people you hire at the beginning are extremely crucial to the success of the company. And so, just to continue the story, when PG, Paul Graham asked me to get a co-founder, I just couldn't find someone, and then I continued to work on the idea. Then I found these two guys. One was an engineer, one is an engineer, and one is a product manager. They were both incredible. They were both better than I was. They were both smarter than I was. And I brought them on and also gave them a co-founder titles. And they have been pivotal to the success of the company. And so I'd say one key takeaway that I've had is just the people that came early have had a fantastic they've had a phenomenal experience at Instacart.
Is there a skill that you wish you had that you don't have, or that you don't feel is honed enough?
That one would also keep us here till tomorrow, I think. I think the big one that certainly I lacked in the beginning, and that I think that kind of if the company succeeds, you just have to get much better at very quickly, is kind of, to say management, I think sounds a bit too simplistic or pithy or something. It's the whole set of issues around interacting with, helping to lead, working with, hiring other people, right? In that if things work out, you're pretty quickly going to have a couple hundred people, right? How do you ensure that they know what to do? How do you ensure that they know what the company is doing and how all the different pieces fit together? How do you, what should the management structure be? What should the incentive structure be? Like the kind of the whole set of issues. And like this is really complicated stuff. Like there are people in the world who are phenomenal at this, and it takes them, decades to acquire that knowledge. And so here you are trying to build a world-class organization, but generally, or at least certainly in my case, with none of that prior experience. Right. And you have to go through this kind of really accelerated learning process. And in some ways, it's kind of worse than in some of the companies that have, or organizations that have done this best, because the organizations that have had it really figured out tend to be fairly stable, right? And they've had decades to kind of develop the culture and some of the kind of mindsets behind it. Whereas for you, you were 4 people 12 months ago. And so I think that, again, that whole area, I think most founders start out pretty considerably behind on it, and you really got to figure it out.
Apoorva, different topic. Beyond Instacart and beyond Stripe, if you look around at the private companies that we all know about today, and maybe some of the ones that we don't know about, and you had to pick 2 or 3 of the ones that you think will endure, they'll be great companies 10 years from now, and they're private today, which are those?
So not
including
Stripe.
Current company.
Or Sequoia, I think they have a good chance.
I think Uber is going to be a great company. It's going to be a long-lasting company. I think Dropbox is going to be another great company.
Any thoughts, Patrick?
I guess it's so hard to predict all these things. The one that most recently just struck me as sort of having the potential to be sort of surprisingly huge, sort of out of proportion to its current size, was Magic. And so, look, I mean, Magic is at a very different stage to Uber. I think just in terms of absolute probabilities, Uber, I'm sure, has a higher probability currently of endurance. But if you just kind of really squint, and if you think about sort of in a sort of desktop keyboard world, in some ways, kind of the most important thing is how you search. Like kind of Google is the interface to the desktop computer. If you really squint, and I admit this is a bit of a stretch, it kind of seems like the text message-based interface to Magic and sort of deploying it as sort of a wand in the real world seems like it has potentially the same kind of universality. And so I think they've only been working on the company for 2 months or something like that. But relative to its stage, it seems like Magic is very high potential.
I detect we have company on the stage, Patrick and Apoorva.
Great. So we'd also love to give all of you the chance to ask any questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll give a mic, we'll hand a mic over to you.
Question to Patrick. I actually came here to ask you on your thoughts about Magic and the whole conversational commerce. So if you could say a few more words about that. I'm curious now that you said what you said.
How did you know to ask me about Magic?
Well, I thought you might have some thoughts on it.
Yeah.
So you said it could be a new gateway to the world, to the internet, whatever. Do you see this new trend that nobody really understands, I think, yet, as conversational commerce, or you think that text-based or voice-based interfaces are something more than that?
I'm not really sure. I guess it has been really striking to see just on Stripe how kind of quickly this space of on-demand apps, magic wand apps, whatever you want to call them, like how rapidly that's exploded. Be it Instacart, which I guess is kind of the category leader, but also DoorDash, Postmates, Ship, Sprig, SpoonRocket, right? There's just kind of a huge number of them, and yeah, I think the question is very hard to predict is sort of how the interfaces to all these shake out. I think it's hard to predict both because that's sort of contingent on very subtle UI nuances. Like, is it better to describe something in sort of free-form text, or is it better to select it with a series of taps, and kind of can you build a proper ontology? And how does that work across different stores? And just like it's really complicated. And also because it's contingent on what the platform owners do. And so, I mean, you could imagine that if it can be very structured in some way that makes it perhaps more likely that the platform owners themselves will do it because they'll be able to impose that structure, whereas if it's free form, as with a text message, a startup can do it, right? And so I think that the general category of using your phone to sort of coordinate actions sort of spinning around you in the real world will be enormous. But as to what the interface looks like, I really don't have a good sense.
Next question. We got people over here. Just to speed it up, if you just want to stand up and yell out the question, we can repeat it. Questions about Bitcoin, the future thereof.
So the question is just general views, I guess, about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. True views. We published a blog post back about, I guess, 9 months ago now that sort of tried to put forward some of Stripe's thinking in general around Bitcoin. Mostly I feel like it's probably not on a success trajectory right now, Bitcoin at least in particular. Like, the analogy is often drawn to the Internet of '99, but like, I mean, the Internet of '99. Let's say the web started in '93, '94 or thereabouts, right? And so the Internet of '99 is kind of 5 years in. Well, I mean, Bitcoin, I guess the paper came out, the protocol was released in 2008, and so we're now 7 years into Bitcoin. And in some sense, we're kind of even longer because in general, things just happen faster on the internet now. Like if you look at sort of the adoption curves of products, it's now much more compressed. And so I think that the fact that Bitcoin is only what it is today is not especially, it's not as good as one might hope, right? And then if you look at sort of the growth trajectory, transactions per day, dollars per day, whatever, it's also not growing that quickly. And having said that, I hope it succeeds, right? I think that having this kind of decentralized infrastructure for the world would be fantastic. A lot of the problems that we work on as Stripe are about sort of unification of all these different systems and protocols and so forth. And so to have Bitcoin sort of be a tailwind in bringing that about, I think would be tremendous. Part of me also feels that as transactions become electronic, we're kind of silently losing rights, right? In that I can give you $20 here and now, and sort of no central authority can really have much to say about that transaction. Whereas if transactions are sort of electronic on the current trajectory, then there'll be so many gatekeepers between me and you, right? If I try to send you it via bank transfer networks or whatever, right? And so I hope it succeeds, but I wish we were doing better.
Next question. Yeah.
For Patrick, what do you expect to be the main differences between how payments happen now and how payments will happen 10 to 15 years from now?
I think the biggest one will just continue to be this kind of substitution of online transactions for offline ones. And that won't primarily look like a payments shift in the sense that all the stuff around like do you use NFC or EMV or pay with your watch or whatever, right? That's fine, but I think that's not actually the interesting shift. I think the interesting shift is that, for example, you use Instacart to buy your groceries rather than going to the grocery store. And so there's a couple of shifts coupled there together, right? It's that the groceries are like magically flying to you rather than you going to the grocery store. It's that you're using this service Instacart rather than using kind of Whole Foods. And then there's a payment shift where rather than swiping your credit card, you're sort of paying remotely, electronically, or whatever in the app. And so I think that one of the figures we often talk about with Stripe is that only 2% of consumer spending happens on the internet today, globally, which I think is really remarkable. There's like still 50x more in some way offline than online. And so I think that 2%, if you just think about how you spend or kind of what that's likely to look like in 10 years' time and kind of how your cohort is kind of developing, that's so obviously going to be 20, 30, 50%, who knows, right? And so if you just kind of think about that shift applied to the rest of the world, I think that there's going to be this enormous substitution. But it probably won't look primarily about a payments shift. It'll look like, use a lot more services like Instacart.
Question at the back here.
So this is a question directed at Mike. Where do you see the intersection of healthcare and technology evolving in the future? I've just spent the past 2.5 years helping my mother turn around her health. And I was wondering if you have any vision on where you see healthcare and technology intersecting in the future.
I think we're at the beginning. Sequoia hasn't invested very heavily in healthcare over the last 25 years, but we've done so over the last 5 to 7, and I suspect it'll increase. And a lot of it is around the explosion and emergence of, thanks to the revolution that's occurred in sequencing. So a lot of the data that is now available that used to cost, either you couldn't get your hands on for individuals or was prohibitively expensive, is now becoming available, and that's going to have all sorts of implications for the way that people take care of themselves, for the way that doctors monitor and look after patients, and for the way that biopharmaceutical companies come up with new regimens that will be increasingly dialed to the peculiarities and idiosyncrasies of the individual. Next question.
Yeah, I had a question on co-founders. I started a company and I was the non-technical co-founder. Company went on to be successful, but where do you guys find in the space where I see so many great companies being founded by engineers and the technical founder, but I also see great non-technical founders with good ideas, but it kind of seems like they're in over their head because they're not able to actually build it. So
what do you think about that, Apoorva?
Any advice on that?
Yeah, so one of the guys who joined Instacart very early, Max, he's non-technical, but he's the least not technical, non-tech co-founder, right? So I think there's a tremendous amount of value that non-technical co-founders can add, because when you're starting a company, sure, there's a lot of code to be written, there's a lot of products to be designed, but there's a tremendous amount of other stuff that needs to get done as well. And having someone to just basically just deal with that is very important. So I think that I actually think that it is undervalued, the importance of having non-tech co-founders.
So we're out of time, it turns out, and I think you can see why I'm so lucky and fortunate to work with two wonderful characters, Apoorva and Patrick, and you've just got a glimmer and just the skittering over the top of the surface of the depth and genuine commitment that both of them have to developing and building companies that are going to be enduring parts of the landscape and some of the issues anyway associated with that. And you've also got a glimpse, I think, of two incredibly accomplished and humble characters, both of whom you will also have learned do not intend to apply to join the legal department of Goldman Sachs. So thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, Patrick, and Apoorva, for sharing your wisdom. And thank you for your continuous support of the engineering community. We ask that everyone stay seated for one brief minute as we introduce our closing note from Silicon Valley Bank. Please join me in welcoming John Lee, Vice President of Early Stage Banking, Silicon Valley Bank. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's been great to be here for this wonderful conversation. And thanks to Stanford Tau Beta Pi, Stephanie in particular, for giving us a chance to help support this event and to be part of this great event. I just want to take a minute to just give you a brief introduction to Silicon Valley Bank and give you an understanding of what we do and why we're here today. So as a bank, what makes us unique is really our focus on the innovation economy. So we focus on working with tech companies, life science companies, energy and resource companies, as well as venture capital firms. We're worldwide in scale. We've got about 35 offices across the US and globally in countries like the UK, Israel, and China. And we work with companies across all stages, from brand new startups all the way to publicly traded companies. Our mission is really to help our clients succeed. And one of the ways that we do that is by supporting organizations that help foster innovation, such as Stanford Tau Beta Pi. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here. It's been great for us to help support this event. And thanks very much.
Thank you, John. And with that, we conclude our event. If anyone is interested in speaking with any of the speakers outside, we encourage you to join us outside of CEMEX. Thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.